Tonight it's Wednesday, and that means it's all about the law and a president who says he's above the law. More Republicans calling out Donald Trump for saying he can pardon himself. Former federal prosecutor will join us to weigh in. Then a constitutional law professor joins us to take a look at the Supreme Court docket. A big ruling just came down on that same-sex wedding cake case, and it could impact the travel ban case that is pending. We'll explain. Also, the police union in New York has successfully sued to block the release of body cam video. We're going to debate whether or not the public should have a right to see the footage. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you very much for joining us. As you say every Wednesday, new developments in the Russia probe. Now the hits, well, they just keep on coming. Now we're going to start with Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign manager. He could be in jail theoretically by the end of the week. Prosecutors, they're accusing him of witness tampering. They say Manafort tried to conduct two potential witnesses, and that's a definite no-no. He could wind up behind bars till his trial. Manafort, he has pleaded not guilty to a slew of charges, including conspiracy and money laundering. Then there's Jeff Sessions. President Trump continued to slam his own attorney general. I want to remind you, Trump, he appointed Sessions, one of his earliest supporters, and Sessions, an advisor during the campaign. All of that has led legal experts to say Sessions was correct in when he stepped aside for the Russia probe. About the only one who disagrees with this consensus is, yes, Donald Trump. Now, the Russia witch hunt hoax continues, according to the president, all because Sessions didn't tell me he was going to recuse himself. I would have quickly picked someone else. So much time and money wasted, so many lives ruined. And Sessions knew better than most that there was no collusion. Plus, Times reporting that Trump has asked Sessions to take control of the probe, that after he recused himself. And that's bringing up obstructions of justice questions. And of course, the Rudy effect, still hanging over this whole thing. Rudy Giuliani, he's been making headlines since he joined Trump's legal team. Unfortunately for Trump and Rudy, pretty much none of them have been helpful to the Trump case. This is his latest and perhaps greatest.
Do you and the president's attorneys believe the president has the power to pardon himself?
He's not, but he probably does. I mean, he has no intention of pardoning himself, but he probably does. It doesn't say he can't.
He even went further than that, which we'll talk about in a minute. But Paul Ryan is not even buying that the president can pardon himself. Here, the House Speaker.
I don't know the technical answer to that question, but I think obviously the answer is he shouldn't, and no one is above the law.
And to help us sort all this out, former federal prosecutor Ellie Honig. Ellie, as always, thank you. And let's get first to the Manafort news here because, well, you can explain it better than me. If there's one thing both judges and prosecutors don't go along to get along with is actual defendants contacting people that potentially are on witness lists and trying to get everybody on the same story. That's a definite no-go.
Yeah, so when a defendant like Paul Manafort is out on bail, you know, the court's giving you some leeway and investing some trust in you. And the main condition of bail is always no additional crimes. And as you said, Richard, you know, when I was a prosecutor, one of the things that drove me craziest and drives courts craziest is tampering with witnesses, obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, because it strikes at the heart of our entire adversarial criminal justice system. So there's going to be a hearing on Friday. We've seen the government's brief making, I think, a really compelling case that, A, that Manafort did this, and B, that it means he needs to be remanded into jail. And we'll see what Manafort's lawyers come back with. If I had to guess, they'll just say, well, no, it's not what they think. It wasn't an attempt to obstruct justice. He was just conversing with witnesses. But I think the texts themselves belie that. And, you know, if Manafort is remanded to jail, it sort of changes the whole calculus for him.
You know, I mentioned Speaker Ryan earlier. He had basically sided with Trey Gowdy, who's the leader on the Intelligence Committee, to say there's no there when it comes to this so-called Spygate, which was, I guess, the story for one news cycle. But he also said a president can't pardon himself and that no one is above the law. I know I'm not handing out Profile and Courage Awards, certainly to Paul Ryan lately, but we'll get to the pardoning himself in a second. But if you're Mueller, do you have to look at some of the political context here? Because at the end, if he delivers his report, it's going to be basically up to Congress and a political decision if they choose to pursue articles of impeachment. Does he have to kind of read the tea leaves as to the legislative body and where they will and won't be willing to go in the pursuit of justice?
I don't think Robert Mueller's thinking about that at all, or any human being would. But I think Robert Mueller, the way he's conducted this investigation, is he's going straight ahead with the facts and the evidence. Now, you're definitely right that this ultimately could be a case decided in the political realm as opposed to the criminal justice realm. And as you say, I think most people agree the most likely outcome from Mueller is that he delivers a report to the House of Representatives through Rod Rosenstein and with certain recommendations. And if that's the case, then it will be a political resolution. But I don't think Mueller is consciously thinking about or making decisions based on, well, here's how it's going to play politically. I do believe that Mueller and his team are looking at the facts, looking at the evidence, looking at the law. They're going to make their recommendation. They're going to do what they think is right under the law. And then they do understand that it will ultimately come down to politics in the House of Representatives. But I don't think they're altering any of their behavior because of that. But indeed, it seems very likely that this will somehow end up in front of the House.
Yeah, but Ellie, he has shown some calculations, for example, bringing in some of the state attorney generals, which would void the idea of blanket pardon power here that obviously would more likely compel someone to be a cooperating witness or not, with all the telegraphing of the president that he's hanging out pardons like Pez dispensers.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think he is making sort of emergency provisions for what if this case gets stomped out. I'm not sure I would call that a political, but I think he's aware of the reality that there are any number of ways Trump could try to essentially just nix this investigation. Could be by convincing Sessions to unrecuse himself, quote unquote, and then kill the investigation. Could be from a blanket self-pardon or pardon to all the, the Manaforts and Michael Cohens of the world. And I think that Mueller is thinking ahead to those potential sort of chess moves. But this is obviously a more multi-dimensional chessboard than you have in your normal criminal case. But you're right, Richard. It's been reported that Mueller has thought about, well, the one thing that Trump cannot touch or even purport to touch is state attorneys general. And so we don't know, but there may well be pieces of this case sitting out there in various state attorneys general office.
You mentioned Sessions, and literally the guy's been emasculated by the president seemingly on a weekly basis. But can we just clear one thing up? The president clearly believes the original sin was Sessions recusing himself. But as I laid out, he didn't have a choice. It wasn't that people said, I was surprised. He worked on the campaign. He endorsed the president. He was involved in the conversations. Even if he wanted to stick around, wouldn't have everybody made the argument, you had to recuse yourself?
Yeah, this was a no-brainer recusal for Jeff Sessions. I've seen people recused on a fraction of it. I myself have been recused off cases, not for anything nefarious, but just knowing somebody who knows somebody who's involved in a case. I mean, real prosecutors are very careful with recusals, even if there's no actual conflict, even if there might be just an appearance or somebody might say, well, hey, there's a problem there. We recuse ourselves. This is a no-brainer. And not only did Sessions participate with the campaign, I mean, there's footage of him, in front of a rally putting on that orange, or excuse me, that orange is the skin color, the red Make America Great Again hat. But also remember, Sessions testified in front of Congress in a way that may be inaccurate as to his own dealings with Russians, if you recall that. So he's got a couple different ways that he had to recuse himself. It's a no-brainer that he did the right thing. And, perhaps Trump regrets that he put someone in that place who was willing to do the right thing. And that proper recusal certainly did result in the reins being handed over to Rod Rosenstein and then the appointment of Mueller.
Okay, next to the idea of pardoning oneself, I mean, Rudy went so far as to say, hey, the president could literally go out there and shoot James Comey, and the law couldn't touch him. First of all, imagine the conversation where the president's attorney is talking about the president being able to assassinate the former FBI director. But beyond that, where are we with this? The founding fathers could never have intended, when they set this government up to be very different than the monarchy in England, that basically the president is a king. Can the president pardon himself like Rudy says?
It just can't be. I mean, look, there's no answer to it in the Constitution itself on the piece of parchment, and it certainly would end up in front of the Supreme Court. But, you know, I think the one thing that our founders and the public today will not tolerate is somebody who essentially declares themselves untouchable. And if you look at that 20-page letter from Trump's lawyers to the Mueller team that came out this week, that's essentially what that letter says. It says there's nothing you can do about anything Trump does because he's the president and he is the law. And that's why George Washington stepped down after 2 terms. That wasn't a requirement back then. That became a constitutional requirement later. But George Washington understood then, and I think people understand now, that our system will not tolerate somebody who says, I'm beyond the reach of the American people and the public.
Finally, Ellie, for those of us that are concerned, regardless of the findings, even if there's a smoking gun and that there's a clear pattern, whether it be obstruction, whether it be collusion, or whether it even be out of the Stormy Daniels case here, if there is not the moral fiber in Congress to move on something like that, is there an element that the Supreme Court gets involved in if the president refuses to hear the subpoena, or if there's an indictment, or the president decides he's going to pardon himself? When does the third branch of the Supreme Court here, when would they play a role? Give me the scenario.
Yeah, so I think the House of Representatives only comes into play if there's an impeachment proceeding. The Supreme Court, I think, would be the likely place that some of these legal criminal justice questions would end up. For example, may a president pardon himself? That would almost certainly, if the president does that, almost certainly end up directly in front of the Supreme Court. You know, can the president be indicted? That's another issue that's never been resolved. Scholars have come out, yes, no. Ken Starr had his advisor tell him yes. The DOJ guidance says no. So that's another issue that I think would wind up directly in front of the Supreme Court. And if either one of those issues is raised during this case, then I do think the Supreme Court will hear it, and it would be pretty fascinating to see.
Absolutely. Ellie, as always, I appreciate it. And one day, I promise we'll have a conversation that doesn't seem like it's, bad drama TV, a late night soap serial here. This is bizarre, the world that we're in right now, but there it is. Ellie Honig, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Richard.
Coming up next, the latest from the highest court, as we just talked about, SCOTUS here. Supreme Court just ruling on the same-sex wedding cake case, and that one, it could impact the travel ban case that's pending as well. We're going to cover it all with constitutional law professor. That's straight ahead.